Hello everyone and welcome back to Local Liberty. This is Brian and Shane again. We are back after a little break, but we have not been sitting idly by. We have been keeping track of what's going on in town and abroad, as well as coming up with some new ideas for episodes to discuss with you guys. What we're going to discuss today is sort of starting a theme you definitely will hear more about in the coming future, is we're going to start talking about the local elections. There's a whole bunch of them happen every couple of years. And what we're going to talk about today is the Senate District 29, where we have the incumbent May Flexer running against John French. And they had a very closely contested election 2 years ago, and it's expected to be another close one this time around. So I'm going to share a few thoughts on this election so far, as well as just some general information on voting in general, how I feel about it. So if you've been following in libertarian circles a lot or at all, there's a general controversy around, should you vote at all, or is voting in and of itself, is it immoral, is it an act of aggression? And I don't think it is, because in the most general sense, what is a vote? A vote is just expressing a preference. You vote, you cast a vote when you shop at Walmart instead of going to Home Depot, or when you buy something on Amazon and as opposed to some other real online retailer. So that is a vote. We vote all the time. So the action in and of itself of expressing your preference, there's clearly nothing immoral about that. There's nothing wrong with that. But that said, I also think people choosing to just abstain from voting, in particular if they're disgusted with both or all candidates, or they see no material difference between them, I think that is also an expression of preference. You're voting for none of the above by not bothering to vote, and I think that's an extremely valid option. So I always reserve that for myself in any election, and I have no problem if somebody else takes that path.
I don't understand people that vote for a candidate they don't agree with. Like, I couldn't vote for someone that I have nothing in common with. We don't have common ground. Maybe they're slightly less bad than the other person, perhaps, but my vote is an endorsement of that candidate. The candidate I'm voting for, they don't go, oh, they vote for me because they like me a little, they don't hate me as much as the other person. No, they take your vote as an endorsement of their policies. You're endorsing their policies. So if they're so far away from me, I'm not going to vote for them, even if I think they're slightly less bad than the other person. We have to have something in common, something I can cling on to, that I can respect and go, well, I only like this, but this is good and this matters more.
Right, and that's sort of, that jumps right into the next section is, you don't have to strictly consider an endorsement of somebody when you vote for them. I think in the sense voting can and very often is, it's defensive. You're going to vote for the less damaging of the two options, because the reality is this system is here. We live in a politicized world. We live in obviously a country we live in a region of the world, the United States, that is governed like every other region. There's a government. They hold elections, and whether you want to or not, the outcomes of these elections are going to affect you. And in the sense of taking a defensive action, just like you could. In a crystal clear case, if someone's about to hit you over the head with a baseball bat, you can take defensive action. If someone is attempting to do something that is harmful to you in the electoral process, there is nothing wrong with taking a defensive action, which would be, I'm going to vote for the person that's going to hurt me less.
See,
and that's not about being the lesser of two evils.
It's the lesser of two evils.
You don't have to say that either person's evil. You can just say that this person is more closely aligned with, or this person is less farther away from me than the other person.
But still, the candidate doesn't take that way. They take it as an endorsement. So now, the number of votes a candidate gets, let's say they win, but they win by a wider margin, that's just more of a mandate for them to implement policies I don't like. So if that candidate doesn't have any policies I like, let's take Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. There's not much I agree on with them as far as I can tell. There's not much there. I can't see myself voting for either of them. So even if I try to do some calculus about who's worse, but there are other candidates other than them. There'll be third-party candidates that I could vote for, that I can endorse those policies.
But that is, what you said about, you're sort of leading your some credibility to them. You're giving them some mandate or whatever. That's true, and that's a good reason to not vote at all. If there's a whole bunch of people that are just horrendous to you,
that's what I'm saying.
But that's a good reason to. That's one of the ways to kind of weigh the pluses and minuses of the whole thing is if I vote for this guy, if things going to get worse in general. And it's like person A is going to make things this much worse, and person B is going to make things this whole huge amount more worse. I'm doing very scientific terms. Then yes, don't vote for either of them. But if you're faced with a candidate where you think like there's a material appreciable difference between the two, and one of them is going to be we're talking about politics here, so. If you got your head on straight, we're not really dealing with a situation where someone's actually going to make things better for you. You're dealing with a situation where someone is going to make it less harmful. So that's just...
I don't necessarily agree with that, but we can move on.
All right. So basically, you can participate in this system without validating it and condoning it. Again, you can participate in this from a defensive measure. So that point beat to death. Let's move on to some of the specifics between our candidates that we're going to be... the two... realistic options we can presume. Again, the third party thing, that's all fantastic, but the whole system is geared towards funneling us into two choices, and the two choices that we're going to be funneled with for Senate District 29 is going to be May Flexer, the Democratic Party, and John French, the Republican candidate. So just a little bit about May. Basically, if you've been anybody that's been following this for the last decade or less, last 5-6 years, it's very clear that May Flexer is crawling right out of the cesspool that is Don Williams' political legacy. And I think it's difficult to say otherwise, to the point where that Don Williams has had a huge amount to do with the direction that our state went. He was the most powerful politician in the legislature for 10 plus years. Everything that he did, which was by and large all harmful to us, May is following down that road lockstep, and she won't even deny that. Like that's one of her campaign pillars, is carrying on his legacy. So if you didn't like what you got from Don, then don't be fooled into thinking that a new person, a new face is going to be introducing something for the positive just because they're just a new identity on the block. The Democrats in particular are known for being a very cohesive bunch, and this is a beautiful illustration of that. So another thing you might notice about May is, from looking at her bio and her not really a resume, but her biography is placed on our Senate Democrat website. I don't think she's ever worked in a private capacity. I don't think she's ever had any employment that was not directly or indirectly related to the state. So to me, that is a huge... sort of a huge point of consideration when thinking about a candidate. Is the whole career politician thing. That's often brought up for certain people, but if a person has never ever worked in the private sector, that means a lot as to what kind of experience they have, what kind of viewpoints they hold, and what kind of values that they're going to bring to their role as our elected leader / master. So then I want to talk about a few specific things that May's been up to this year so far. And some of these go back previous to that, but these have been active this year. And one of them is this whole affirmative consent thing. This is kind of her thing that she's pushing. And basically what this is to, change the legal definition, or not the legal definition, but the procedural requirements that a university has to go through when they're dealing with some kind of sexual assault case. They have to have some standard that looks for, was there a sustained and explicit consent to any type of sexual activity. And this whole thing kind of gets boiled down to the poster that goes up is the yes means yes. And this is one of those things, we've discussed it before, Shane, like this is one of those things that just kind of comes down to it sounds nice. It's, we don't want people to be raped. Everybody loves women. We want women to be taken care of. We want everybody to be safe. But this plays into what I think some wider points about, expressing things like, we have to do something to combat the rape culture on campus. Is there really a rape culture on campus? No, there's not. Think about, there's not even a rape culture in our entire society. But this is one of those points where you get these little subtle nudges to get people to thinking like, wow, we've got this horrible aspect of our culture that we just accept rape. When no, this is one of the least acceptable things that a human being can possibly do outside of a college campus or inside of a college campus.
Doesn't matter.
Right.
It's an egregious violation of personal liberty.
But it's also perceived that way in our culture. It's not, but that's what this, that's what these, like her pushing this.
Right. What you're saying is this might be a valid issue if it was an issue, if there really was an epidemic of rape.
Right.
But is there? Do the statistics actually bear that out?
Yep, and just looking from, some of these articles are old now. This is from a couple months ago when this was spinning the headlines most recently. Some of these articles, some of the highlights I called out here, this is from a student. As a student, I feel safer with an affirmative consent standard. So, this is the kind of stuff that just makes you shake your head. You're safer because of some almost impossible to enforce and even difficult to define standard written on paper within some, college tribunal that you go through, which, slight side shoe, but basically this whole system that this affirmative consent will be wrapped up in is the kangaroo court known as the college, I can't think of the word, but when you get some accusation gets posted against you, you're going to go to the, to this whole sort of quasi judicial system that you're not entitled to a lawyer, you're not entitled to talk to witnesses, you're not entitled. It's a Soviet style court that you will get subjected to when you are accused of wrongdoing on a college campus, and then maybe after all that you'll get actual criminal charges against you. But basically, someone say, I feel safer now that we're mucking around this kangaroo court system in a very potentially meaningless way. That's the kind of stuff that just makes me a little sad that this is the stuff that's making a young adult feel safer today. So this, to me, to sum up, this whole yes means yes, affirmative consent thing, this is just more the political correct nonsense and extending the victimization culture. Whereas, there's a rape culture where women are subjected to just a widespread and sustained pressure of rape. It just doesn't happen. It's not factual. So all this stuff coming from May, at its very best, is just a distraction. On to the next point, which is a little more concrete. She proposed something a couple months ago to have a state-run family medical leave insurance program, which basically is some sort of pool that people can pay into, not that they can't pay into, I should explain, that they can have taxes taken out of their paychecks, which then goes into some kind of quasi-insurance type fund that they can draw against when they need to take time off. And again, this is one of those things where you say, well, gee, time off, that's great. Who doesn't want to have paid time off? This is fantastic. But this is where you get into somebody trying to take what is otherwise a positive thing, which is being able to take time off when your family's sick, and then tie it into the wonderful coercion of the state, which says, we're going to take some money from your paycheck whether you want it or not. And then this is a fantastic quote.
So let's be clear. So this is an additional tax that's now, that the burden is borne by everyone, and now people will have this option to take leave. So you're saying for state workers, all state workers?
No, not state workers. Everybody. Okay. Everybody in the state. Every worker in the state. So it's just another socialized means of producing something. Now we're going to, instead of leaving the free market to decide how paid time off should work between employers and employees, we're going to step in with the mighty hand of the state top down and say, you know what, we decided that we're going to take 0.54% additional income tax, and that's going to make the whole people taking care of their sick children problem go away. But here's a good quote. From May, we could expect maybe 100,000 Connecticut workers to take 3 to 15 weeks of paid medical leave in any given year, about 5% of the state's total workforce. This is from Senator May Flexer. And quote, that's not a burden to businesses. And I think that end part is a part that really just rings. That's very difficult to swallow from a person that has never ever worked in a private business of any kind. How could she have any clue whatsoever what is or is not a burden to a business? She can't.
That logic doesn't follow. So I can't criticize something if I've never done it myself. I can't say someone's playing basketball incorrectly even though I'm not a basketball player. I can't criticize someone that's doing any particular job and go, you know what, you're doing a bad job at that even though I've never had that job. That's ridiculous. Of course,
no,
of course you can make claims. You don't have to.
You can make claims. My argument is not saying that she can't make a claim. My argument is what kind of credibility should her claim be given? And if you've never ever played basketball 1 second in your life, when you get you watch the Final Four and you start commenting on, hey, that guy didn't do this or that, then your critiques just aren't that credible. That's my point.
The claim is not based on the credibility of the person making it. It's based on whether the claim itself is true or not. So that statement that she just said right there, I don't know if it's true or not because I don't know the details of this program, but she can consult with other people that are experts in the field and base it on their opinion, not just her just making things up. Now, I have no idea. She might just made this up. I'm just saying, just because someone says something and they're not necessarily an expert in that field doesn't immediately invalidate everything they say. I mean, otherwise, all our statements we make about economics, politics, and everything else would not be valid. Well, actually, I guess you're not an elected official, but I'm not an elected official. I'm not an economist.
I'm
not
an elected official.
Right, but before you were an elected official, when you started the show, before you were an elected official?
I was an elected official before the show, but anyway, go on.
Oh, okay. So I guess what you're saying is anything I make, any of my discussion, so it's not true.
No,
so
I was appointed. Anyway, I'm not sure where this sidetrack is going.
The sidetrack is that you're dismissing her out of hand because she hasn't held a private sector job, and that's irrelevant to me, whether her policies are good, bad, or otherwise. That's an irrelevancy. Sure, generally speaking, when you talk to someone, say me, I'm a musician, I respect the opinion of other musicians more generically. But that doesn't mean if I hear someone who doesn't play an instrument go, that doesn't really sound too good, I just go, oh, you know what you're talking about. You don't play an instrument. Get out of here. No, of course not. But there's a weighting, but you can still take what they say at face value and go, does this make sense or not, regardless of their background, right? You have to assess the claim, not the credentials so much of the claim maker, even though they can indicate things. But it does not. It's not. The indication is not this is definitely true or definitely not true. That's what I'm saying. You're saying because she's never been in a private business, never had a private job, which I'm not sure if that's true, but let's say it is, that anything she does with the private sector is automatically undermined, and she doesn't know what she's doing, and this is, and we can just dismiss her out of hand. I don't think that's true.
Credibility is important, and credibility, by and large, the best place it comes from is experience.
Right, but you dismiss. We talk about economists, and you dismiss a lot of stuff I talk about economics out of hand from experts in the field. But they're not. I
disagree with it.
Right, but you disagree with them. So you say they're not credible all the time. So you're trying to undermine their credibility. But they're the so-called experts. They're the ones that do this for years and years and years. Right, you can still disagree with them, and I still think it's valid, just like she might be right even though she doesn't have the expertise, right? Because otherwise no one can comment on anything by that standard you're giving. No one can comment on anything except things they've actually done themselves. And that's just ridiculous. You can't get anywhere in society. No one could even vote because they wouldn't know about anything unless you're actually that position for every single issue that you're talking about. Are you an economist? Are you a climate scientist? Are you an evolutionary biologist? Are you an author? Are you an artist? Oh, if you're not any of those things, you can't comment on any of those subjects. That doesn't make any sense. That doesn't work in the real world.
Well, that's not really related at all to what I'm saying.
It is, because you're undermining her credibility because she hasn't been in the private sector, which I think that is an indicator. That may be something you want to know about her. But I think you're pushing it too far to dismiss her all the way out of hand. It's something to mention, something worth knowing, but it doesn't completely just make anything she says, any claim she makes about business to be wrong. They could be wrong. I don't know. I don't know what the details of this deal. I'm skeptical just hearing her say it. But I think it's more like, it sounds to me more like a personal attack towards her than anything that's getting us somewhere.
Okay, let's move to the next point.
He loves it.
The third thing I'd like to bring up, recent headlines from May, is, and this one I think is has received the most attention because it's particularly sensitive in the quiet corner, was the whole budget battles and how they relate to the hospitals. And I have not followed this in all the close detail because who wants to read a state budget, particularly when you're not working at a hospital. But these budgets are having a huge effect on some of the small local hospitals, like Day Kimball up in Danielson area. And basically, the point I want to bring up here, and again, I think this is talking about credibility and character, is May Flexer did a total about face on, this is where you get to see some of the nastiness of politics, is people starting to eat their own. Is this turned into this big finger pointing between between Malloy and then the legislature of who's responsible for screwing up the budgets of all these hospitals, and the fact that these hospitals are all quasi-public, quasi-private, totally removed from the free market. That's another conversation. I would prefer these hospitals were not so intimately dependent on state budgets, but that's another story. But basically, you have May Flexer passing a budget for she's been in the state legislature as a rep since 2008 and a senator since 2014, and the legislature passes the budgets. Yet somehow, when the budget includes items to take money away from hospitals, May gets to get up there and say, basically, pass the buck to the governor, who, by the way, is not in an election year, so he's got no problem really taking this heat. Pass the buck to the governor, and then say, we're fighting for these hospitals. We're fighting for them. Never mind the fact that May and all of her pals have, one, been passing the budgets that take money away from hospitals, and otherwise passing budgets that greatly strained to the point of breaking the state's ability to pay for things that people deeply value, like hospital funding. So credibility and their ability to be taken at their word for what they mean, these things are important. And again, there's this sort of, obviously we've been trained well enough over the generations to not trust anything politicians say. And that is a healthy trust, or a healthy mistrust. But this sort of speaks to just this wider, this wider tactic or formula, if you want, which is you create a problem, which is a budget that's going to collapse, and then you get to swoop in and solve and be called a hero for solving the problem you already created. So it's fantastic PR, and I'll give credit where it's due, but I'm just trying to call out a little bit of the nonsense here, basically. And it also speaks to how little all these politicians think of our own intelligence and our own memory, that people just forget that, I voted to do X, and X hurts, and now I'm going to vote to do the opposite of X, or I'm going to try to get credit for fixing the very problem I caused. They just expect us to have a very, very short-term memory. So I hope we can, take our, the ginseng herb and sharpen our memory a little bit this election cycle.
Hillary Clinton's relying on you to forget everything she ever did.
Of course she is.
And Trump just doesn't even tell you what he actually believes, so you don't have to worry about that.
He doesn't say a whole lot of anything on the particular detailed side of the scale. But he has been just building hotels his entire life instead of blowing up other countries, so he has that to his credit. But we'll save that for another day. We won't get too sidetracked on this one. So this is the last part I just want to talk about. As you probably have guessed, I'm leaning towards supporting John French in this election cycle. And this may be one of the few elections that I'm actually going to participate in, because I see a meaningful difference between the two candidates. And you can kind of, we have this very popular way of describing politics as left versus right, and in a lot of ways it's insufficient, but it also, these buckets or these categories that you put people into, I think they do have some legitimate meaning, that a lot of the population can kind of come down in these two very meaningful categories that are not left and right, but these are actual descriptive categories of how people think and feel and behave. And that you have this on the what's called the leftist side is things that are based on collectivism and centralization, and then the opposite of that, which is considered more right-wing, is individualism and decentralization. And there's all sorts of inconsistencies across the board.
Yeah, I don't agree with that at all.
There's all sorts of ways where the right, where the left and right overlap. They mean the same thing, but you have these two. And again, this is where the terminology of left versus right, it fails us.
Yeah.
But you have there are certain kinds of people, vast swaths of them, that tend towards collectivist ways to solve problems. And then there's other vast swaths of people that tend towards individualist ways of solving problems.
Yeah, that's the authoritarian versus libertarian scale, the left versus right scale. I think you're confusing with the authoritarian libertarian scale. I think the most libertarian candidate actually still alive is Bernie Sanders. People think that's crazy, but he's the most anti-war candidate. He's been the one that's been the longest advocate of gay rights and individual rights. He's the only anti-drug war candidate. He's not the censorship candidate like Hillary Clinton is. He values personal freedom far more than any other candidates except for Rand Paul before he left. Now, but he has a bunch of other issues that are completely opposite of that. But those core issues are all libertarian. Whereas Hillary and Trump, they don't really have any values towards personal freedom at all. Right? So to me, the most leftist candidate is also the one that's most in line with personal freedom.
So, and that's where the left versus right way to describe things is just muddled. It's confused.
Yes.
It fails us. It doesn't allow us to adequately describe how a candidate is going to
behave. There's an arbitrary separation of issues. You're right. There's like certain issues are randomly left or randomly right. For example, gun control you might think would be kind of a leftist thing, where it's about a personal right to own a firearm, but then it kind of has been taken up by the right. It's a little bit odd, but whatever. That's a whole other discussion. The labeling can be confusing.
So, so where this all comes down to for me is, of these two sort of molds of people, you can have you're a collectivist / centralist, or a individualist / a decentralist. I'm in the individualist camp, in the sense that's how I've always been. That's how I'll be in the future. And that's just from the recognition that we've talked about this before on the show, that only individuals exist. Groups, cultures, societies are just where the places where individuals come together and interact. So, of the two choices for me, John French is a lot closer to what I believe in a sense of individualism and decentralization. And May has proven to be on the other end of the spectrum in many, many regards. So, John is absolutely not as much of an individualist or into decentralization of our way of life as I am, but I expect him to take our District 29 and our state, to the extent that he can, in a far less damaging direction than May Flexer would.
Tell me something. John French, I couldn't find as much information about him during my short research for this segment. How is he on civil liberties? What is his stance on, say, marijuana decriminalization or other such things about personal choice?
I don't know if I specifically covered that topic with him. I'm sure that's probably out there somewhere on some platform. I was
trying to find it. It was very difficult.
My guess is he's going to fall somewhere on this standard conservative angle of that, which is
god awful and terrible and completely anti-individualist.
In some ways, yeah, it is. And
Now,
what?
or no, never mind.
So, as I just said, John is not as much of an individualist in the sense of believing in, decentralized ways to solve problems like drug epidemics and drug use. Although again, and I'm not speaking for him because I don't have his campaign platform in front of me. So
Right there, that's another problem I had with both candidates. I'm trying to go. I remember way back in the day when I was 18, first getting into politics, and I went to this gentleman who's a libertarian candidate, Harry Brown. I went to his website. He had all the issues and his stance on all the issues. It was very clear and well worked out. I have a very hard time finding that for any major politician. Hillary Clinton, you have a website full of fluff and nonsense, and only slowly over time have any real issues been thrown in there.
Well,
and they're always vague and unspecific. Harry was always very detailed about everything.
That's what major politician means in the sense of national politics for presidential elections.
These candidates,
they're going to be as muddled and unclear as they possibly can.
I had a very hard time finding on their pages where they actually think about anything.
Right. When you're, I think part of it is just going to be the campaigns and the effort that go involved to this a local state senate district is, infinitesimally smaller than what you commit to a cheap
Hillary
blog.
Clinton. We have a website. Libya's website. They can have a website, and they can.
I think they probably have.
They
websites.
do, but they don't tell me anything. That's the problem. Like I go to May Flexer's, like she has a Facebook page, and all it is fluff pictures of her posing with veterans and her reading at a kindergarten, right? And then I watched one of the videos of John French giving a speech, like when he said he was running again, and I'm like, okay. Here's good stuff. Okay, I don't like May Flexer. We spend too much. Okay. Where's the detail about anything? And I saw one specific debate where they talked about spending cuts, and John French was asked about it, and he said we have an expenditure problem. The debater asked, okay, what would you cut? And he had no answer. May Flexer surprisingly actually mentioned a specific program. I don't know what the program is. Lean, to get rid of that program to reduce spending. She gave me a specific answer. He gave me fluff. He constantly gave me fluff. Now she also constantly gave fluff too, to the point where I'm like, what do you believe about anything in the world, and what are your actual solutions to a problem? I can't figure it out. And a couple of times I could figure it out, and I'll give a really bad one for May Flexer, which I'm not sure how this went, because the video was from a few years ago, but apparently she wants to make bail bonding more difficult. She wants to impose more arbitrary rules on bail's bondsmen to make it more difficult for poor people to bond themselves out of jail. This is just ridiculous, and I don't know if she ever got this passed or where she's at with this, but I was stunned. I'm like, this is a transaction between the bondsman and the person in jail. What does it matter what the bondsman charges? She wants to change the percentage rate and all this ridiculous stuff, and all it's going to do is hurt poor people.
There's only the window of action that a politician can carry out, and while they're elected, is they can only do one of two things. They can create new arbitrary rules, or they can remove the arbitrary rules that are already there. So. And that sort of speaks to what I would expect to be a different theme between John and May, is that you can count on her to create more arbitrary rules. That's what she's done.
Well, so is John. He wants to take control of special education spending instead of local control. He says that in his speeches. He wants to hand it over to the state instead of localities.
That does not sound right to me. I would actually expect the complete reverse of that, given he's served on the board of ed in Windham, where we've suffered under state control.
Well, it's special education.
Oh, special education.
Specifically.
Okay, well that is a different, that's a different beast, I think, from the massive amount of expense that goes into special ed kids, and I think that just means pass the buck, basically.
You know John a lot better than I do. I'm not sure if I've ever talked to the man, but just seeing these two politicians at a glance, neither of them I have any interest in supporting. They don't say anything interesting to me. They don't say anything about making people's lives better in actual meaningful ways. But I need to do more research. I haven't followed the races very closely.
Well, you're exactly right in the sense that that's why I am supporting John, because I have interacted with him on a personal level. I know him. I know who he is. He's been a business owner in town for years, and just the fact that you earn your living by providing value to others versus you earn your living by becoming an elected politician, that provides a lot.
That provides value to a lot of people, though. Right? So you're talking about your personal interest, which makes perfect sense. But a lot of people, to them, Whatever Mayflex are doing is providing value to them.
It's providing value to them via taking something from other people.
But that's the nature of the system we have. But anyway, that's a whole nother conversation. My point being is, it was difficult for me is trying to learn about the topic, to actually learn about them, even by watching their debates and by watching a couple speeches. And I was disappointed. I was disappointed by both of them.
I think it's going to be an exception.
I wasn't disappointed by one more than the other.
Right. No, I said it's going to be an exception when you go into a campaign and you actually get clear, concise, meaningful answers of what somebody stands for and what they plan to do.
But there's occasional politicians where I go, wow, they say clear things.
Yep, those are the exceptions.
Rand Paul and Bernie Sanders are both two politicians that said a number of things. I'm like, wow, they're the only two candidates that said anything meaningful against the drug war. They're the only two candidates that were actually anti-war, like realistically anti-war, and not after the fact anti-war, like Hillary Clinton, who votes for war, votes to go into Benghazi, and then, so there's some bad decisions made. I wouldn't have made that vote. Bernie Sanders has been much more consistent on the topic. Rand Paul is more consistent. Neither of them are fantastic. They all have all kinds of problems. But I'm just saying, that's bold. I would expect maybe a little bit more of that from these local candidates.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's pay attention to this race as it proceeds.
Of course, Rand Paul and Bernie Sanders aren't going to win, so maybe I shouldn't expect that. Now that I think about it.
Let's pay attention to this race, the Senate District 29 race. We can definitely discuss the presidential elections. And
we have to discuss it. We got to discuss Trump versus Clinton. I'm assuming Clinton's going to win. I'm assuming Trump's going to win. Maybe I'm wrong. But.
Not so sure about on the Republican side, but I'm more confident that Hillary will win because they have a more locked down machine on the Democratic side than they do on the Republican side. But yes, definitely plenty to talk about there. So I think that's a wrap for this rambling episode. This is hopefully something to give you a little bit of interesting ideas to think about of where these different candidates are coming from. And we will be following some of the other local elections as well. Again, they're going to be all over our region every 2 years. We have House District 49, House District 48, which is Colchester area. 49 is our local in Windham. Susan Johnson's been have that seat for a while. And then some other important elections going on in the farther east. The 44th District is one of them. So we'll be following some of these, and you'll hear more from us. Thanks for listening, guys. This has been Brian and Shane. Check us out on Facebook and YouTube at Local Liberty. Take care.